Uh, well, how should we start? Well, the way Shakespeare said that friends, Roman, and countrymen, lend me your ears. We haven't come to bury Caesar, but we have come to explore him today. So I have a few questions about Chinese Revolution, and let's start from their cultural revolution, which started by Mao back in 1966 and 76, and lasted till 76 actually. So I would I love to ask for Wayne Sonter about the truths and realities and fiction about that whole process. Why historically it was important in the history of China to start this particular phase.
I'd see that some of these questions of that, like, finally, what is the real story of the Chinese Cultural Revolution of 1966, 76 is interesting. It's interesting as history. It's relevant insofar as it would help us understand what the world situation is at the moment and the nature of conflict from a global to a local level. I feel it. Looking at these things, what's really the truth of the reality and the fiction of something like the Chinese Cultural Revolution or various other things such as the Tiananmen Square, or as far as that goes, what went on with Mao and the great steps forward and then the great disaster afterwards in the 50s. They're all a part of getting to understand in more detail the nature and the process of the Chinese revolution. I don't want to get caught in this stuff too long, because I see what the relevant matter is in relation to our to put any of these revolutions, Russian or these, we have to frame it in terms of the revolutionary transformation of capitalism, the greatest and most destructive of class society. Its transformation into communism, into a classless society, with the ability to basically overcome societies based on exploitation and move towards, it says, the starting of a human history as opposed to a class history. The progress of the communists, or the revolutionary forces leading up to and after the Chinese Revolution, should be studied in detail to get an understanding. But I mean, I could say the Cultural Revolution was widely supported by many in the left. They saw that as in the West as a big breakthrough. At the end of the Cultural Revolution, it would be seen that maybe things went too far. It was seen within China as ultra-left, that there had to be a consolidation and Deng, and in a sense the right trend came to the fore, and with a focus on accelerating economic development by engaging with the world at large more completely, and if necessary, accepting the strictures of a world capitalist market that they were moving in. And that also was at the time exacerbated by the fact that even within, let's call it, the world socialist movement, there was a major contradiction or antagonism in the relationships between the Soviet Union, where the revolution first broke out after World War I, and between the People's Republic of China, where they achieved in a different way. There wasn't 10 days that shook the world in China. There was a long march and very long protracted struggle, including military struggle, national liberation. so that there are very different circumstances, and I suppose we have to work out whether those circumstances they would shape how the revolution emerged. I think something back there you find with Marx talking about the socialist society will be born with all the hallmarks of the society it came out of. The more backward and barbarous it was, is those are going to have to be overcome over time. So, in a sense, I'd say, yes, we should be studying the historical events. We really need, what I like to think is, we should be able to look at that history as history, but then we're trying to relate that to how we as the current generation of revolutionaries, or the current generation of the world's working class, how can it use those things usefully in terms of how to confront the current global situation. To my mind, that makes it most important that we understand the current situation, not only within China, but between China and its prime antagonist, as designated by the prime antagonist, the United States of America, and how that would help us relate to who our allies are, who our main targets are, and what sorts of policies and programs need to emerge.
Actually, this is quite interesting. Coming from that background, I would the main question would be: was it hegemony winning through coercion, or was it internal dispute within the Communist Party? Because it played a vital role in the aftermath. Because we saw Deng Xiaoping coming into power later on, and Deng was the person who was purged by Mao himself, but he took up the reins. So it's very important to know that was it a power struggle, or hegemony through coercion, as Gramsci says, or it is something with a consent sort of a thing, that whole phenomenon emerged in a different shape, altogether different shape, because it wasn't a Maoist thinking really, it was something which was entirely different which came out ultimately.
There could be a lot of assumptions there. Of course, Gramsci was not alive by then to use China as a model to illustrate his particular slant on how revolution unfolded and what elements made it up. I've never seen, these things are all questions in the sense that they're questions of politics, they're questions of power. So of course there was a struggle. You could have almost a totally inert party and you could still find signs of life in it as shown by internal struggles. I never would imagine there would never be struggle, especially in a revolutionary party, especially in the epoch of capitalism, which in itself is devoted to the constant revolutionisation on its terms of the modes of production. So, yeah, of course there was a politics and power struggle, but I don't see that part there, other than if you want to contextualise the long tail, is in the current struggle between, on one hand, the United States and China and Russia, or the United States, there's the prime capitalist hegemon globally, denoting the People's Republic of China as its prime existential enemy. I think it would be vital, we need to understand that to know where our current struggle should be going, who we should be seeing as our main allies, who we should be seeing as our main enemies or antagonists, so that we can most effectively build the global class struggle in our favour. I like to say, in a sense, these are things we can talk about at the end of a long day. After long days of class struggle, we can go back and pick over that. I mean, there's a lot that we need to fossick about in, for instance, the Russian Revolution, even though that whole phase, you could say, has been terminated with the collapse of Soviet Union. And other than, the afterglow of sentimentality of old times, basically it's gone. We could look at that. I mean, what's the relation of these to the revolutions that brought capitalism into being. But what we really need to understand is how these mechanisms are currently working out at the moment. But there would have been this. Of course, there was a struggle. Was Lin Bao's air accident a conspiracy or an accident? I mean, we could have endless conjecture over that. But how will that relate to what are the elements we can use to enhance our revolutionary potential on this side of the revolution,
Yeah, you're right. But history is not something which dumps the people and finishes it. History is something which is made by the people, as Marx says.
Absolutely.
So I think that they were in process of making history at that time. And both revolutions in Russian, Soviet Revolution and Chinese Revolution were both the product and historical necessities. Unless they were not historical necessities, they would not have come actually. But it's important to understand everything that happened so that we should not make mistakes in future.
The big mistake would be to spend all our time contemplating and discussing history without relating it to our urgent necessity for action.
We'll definitely come to that, actually. That's a part of our discussion.
It'll be a nice place to start there, because then we can draw in the history in the course of trying to look at the current play of forces globally. But if we want to look at, I don't know what else you want to say. What I'm saying is that, of course, the Cultural Revolution expressed contradictions within of forces within that period of transformation, post-revolutionary of society. What's going on at the moment represents, in a sense, contradiction, in the sense that all change is contradiction. It also can reflect antagonisms that are going in. A lot of people, talking from people within China, would see Xi Jinping, for instance, as a radical departure from the period of Deng. It finished it. But is it a shift? Is it antagonism? The point is, what does the opportunities that the current situations open up? Ultimately, all these questions are saying is, what is the nature? Is what's going on in China really an ongoing evolution or transformation of a post-socialist revolution society, part of the transformation of a socialist society into a higher stage? Or is it just one more form of capitalism? But if you want to say it, and thus also an imperialist nation, I think a lot of these questions are leading that. If we are opposing or allying with what's going on with China in relation to what's going on around China and the rest of the world, basically, are we looking at China as a more progressive alternative to the United States, or is it just the same as the United States? I think that's ultimately where all these questions are sort of leading. What is the nature of the socialist revolution in China? I think in that sense we can look at the way it is going at the moment and the way it's been targeted as the polar opposite of the main global capitalist hegemon. If you want those questions, I would say that even if you said it's in some phase of state capitalism, as Lenin said, great, he saw the state capitalism of Germany in pre-war and wartime as a higher form of organisation than a totally dismembered, discombobulated Russia, which the communists were picking up the pieces to create something. He basically said, if only we did have state capitalism. But if you're having, because that's large formations of capital, somehow tied with or allied to the state. But he said the essential question in that situation is who is controlling the state in that state capitalism. And he saw the essence of that was, does the capitalist class control a state, or does the state control capital on behalf of the broader working and popular masses? And then there's details within that. If we want to look at that as how's that working? Is it going to lead to a dead end? Is it allowing scope for further transformation? Because we have to work out who our allies are and our enemies are in this current struggle, with even more at stake now than there was in 1917 or 1949.
Yeah, but Lenin himself actually wanted to develop state capitalism in USSR, because he didn't had he categorically said that I don't have the bricks even to lay down for socialism. So there's nothing wrong with building state capitalism at that stage when you are coming from an agrarian and backward society. But the fact is that what we see in China right now is that there's tremendous contradictions within Chinese, because we have seen that they accumulated lots of wealth and lots of they are investing a lot of money in road and belt projects, and
absolutely.
And then it's over accumulated capital, in fact, which they are
really
actually, they have, because why else $40 billion are being invested only in Pakistan, really. And it's a huge amount actually. And interestingly, there is absolutely no knowledge that to the people that where this money has been invested, and there is no transparency about it. And now the present Pakistani government is trying to shun that. In a way, they want to pull partly out of that road and that project. And we have seen that Gwadar hasn't been developed that far as thought to be developed. And then Chinese actually wanted, to the extent they wanted to have their currency ruling in Gwadar area, which was something, a very hegemonic thing, really. To have your own currency in a country which is independent and your ally, in fact, in many ways. So this is sort of things which actually raise certain questions. That, for instance, that Sri Lankan seaport, Hemantota, something like that, and that 15,000 acres of land alongside it has been leased for 99 years, because they say that they could not pay for that. Another factor which we see, that I was just reading Horvey's book, and he mentioned that 60% of Chinese wealth is in the hand of 10% upper class bourgeoisie of Communist Party. So how would we really see that this is some kind of a socialism, which is, because Soviets never had property, right from Lenin even to Brezhnev era. We don't see anyone commanding. Dachas was nothing actually. That was they were houses, and once you leave the office, the dacha was taken away from you, and there was no private property. But over here, we are watching this private property, and huge private property coming up. So can we call it a sort of a socialist state?
First of all, I would start with the idea of where is the socialist revolution in the West that could have or should have happened 100 years ago. We are sitting with, obviously, after all this time, no idea how to create or harness the forces that lead to an overthrow of the capitalist order this side of the revolution here. But we're all very fine critics of post-socialist revolutionary countries, because they don't provide yet the Shangri-La that we all imagine socialism would be. I think that where you would have to start is at least looking at how the Chinese themselves characterise where they are. I don't know. So the other thing is, of course, there is capital, there is wealth being generated. Capital can be a coloured word, as in you're saying that a socialist society should not able to accumulate credit so that they have the ability to plan because of that. Often if you go back to Marx, they call that a labour fund as opposed to a capital fund. I'll put it this clearly. If you see the biggest threat to the future of humanity is the Belt Road Initiative, because it's going to be the sneaky Chinese getting their fingers into everything, so you'll get the backing of the United States and the US war machine that is openly claiming that these countries are an existential threat to it for no other reason than they're able to outcompete them economically, mainly because over the last 30 years, the wealth that they've generated has been put back into civilian infrastructure and the development of technologies that enhance civilian infrastructure, while the United States has put its investments into the aggrandisement and profit of arms companies and weapons companies and fighting wars for profit all around the planet. I think, when faced with a choice, people would see that the Chinese model certainly offers a more hopeful future, at least an aspiration in the future that is different from what the United States has to offer. A lot of disinformation is constantly generated, and some of the things that you raised just then are examples of them. It's not a taken that things like ports at Gwadar or the one in Sri Lanka, they are certainly nowhere in the order of what normal Western IMF sanctioned investment is in most third world countries by the Europeans, the British, the Americans, where they are making away for corporate profit and are thoroughly exploiting the local area, the local countries, and it is set up to extract further profit from them. You could not compare those two things. The other thing is, it's all right to say there will always be dissidents. Yes, there are people against all this wealth flowing in. If you look at what's going with the Belt Road Initiative, for instance, here in Australia, we're going to apparently get out of our economic crisis that was not created by the capitalist system, it was apparently created by the COVID virus that the nasty Chinese unleashed on us. But their idea is to get out of the crisis, they will spend $300 billion on US weapons and about much the same to prop up the fossil fuel industry for one last gasp of a generation. And that's all right, because the most mad amongst them are all waiting for Armageddon in the final days anyway.
Excuse me. Here, I would interrupt. Actually, I'm not comparing U.S. or imperialism. No, I'm not comparing, because they are capitalist countries. They are imperialists. They are capitalists. They produce their wealth through primitive accumulation, through sheer robbery. They introduce. They did the same to the Chinese and to the Indians, and of course, barring America itself, British Empire put the whole expropriated actually these India and China through opium wars and through different things. I mean, I'm not talking about their birth was illegal. In fact, they was born as predators economies.
Yep.
So I'm not comparing them. I'm comparing
but you have
our
to.
socialist. Yeah, they are. I mean, they have their IMFs, they have their NATOs, and they have their hegemonic forces, and they are dominating the world. But through by force and by financial force and by otherwise straight away by direct intervention in their countries. I'm talking about a socialist country and the progress of a socialist country towards socialism. Actually, the way I want to see China is a liberator. And we had a very soft corner for the Chinese, especially we Pakistanis coming from that background, because we were the first to fall in their lap. In fact, and I still remember in my childhood, I was very, I mean, 7, 8 years old boy waving to Lin Piao coming to my country, and Liu Shaoqi as president. I have a very vivid and soft memories of that country, and I was the first person who was thrown out of school wearing Mao's badge, because it was something which was sort of unkosher in our society to wear Mao at that time. But the fact is that we have our, soft corners for Chinese, but the way the things progressed, the way we saw it ultimately, and now we are seeing that Chinese contractors are marching in Lahore and in a different part of the country, and they are actually advancing a new sort of prostitution wave over there. They marry the girls, they took them away, and they are being sold in the market. I have no authentic proof, but I can prove only the sources, Daily Dawn, which is one of the leading newspapers of Pakistan. So there are news around that. So there is a dominant, hegemonic, nationalist, paternalistic attitude of these people who are maybe it may not be the role of the Chinese government. I'm not sure about that, but this is the individual role which is being depicted over there. And then we go to Gwadar, where they wanted to run their own currency. They have barricaded whole the area, and they don't let any Pakistani come over there. And they have taken, their own worker, which has been coming from China. They are working, and that is creating alienation in already alienated province of Pakistan. Balochistan is already alienated with 10 million population. They have been thrown on one side. They are the rest of the earth, still living in a very primitive society, and where animal and human being drink from the same source. Yeah. Unfortunately, so keeping that in mind, this sort of a hegemonic trend.
If you use those words, yes.
Yeah.
But how does blowing up the rail works and killing people working on them progress the working class and the modernisation and industrialisation of Balochistan or Pakistan?
But there is no progress at all. The question is that...
No, well, you've got so-called Baloch liberation fighters carrying out sabotage and murder. If I were a communist, I wouldn't see that as a progressive step to the independence or autonomy of them or the liberation of Pakistan. Ultimately, what's going on is you can say, well, God, China's working with a backward reactionary state like Pakistan. It's also work with other backward states elsewhere. But what's the choice? That it changes the regimes? Because often when you, for instance, Pakistan, one reason Pakistan's like Pakistan has been because of the play of US imperialism in Pakistan as in relation to the previous blockade and attempt to strangle the Soviet Union. You can't hold China responsible for backward states outside its ambit, nor for the failure of revolution in the West. What I would be suggesting is that we look at what's been done that's positive with China, especially in relation to Russia, and work out how to work with it so that we can do it to our own advantage. As a very simple one where we are here is if it has aspirations and starting to take steps towards things such as an ecological civilization, which in reality cannot become into creation without a further progress towards socialism, first people's power, then socialism internationally, if we can't use that aspiration for such things as pushing for a global Green New Deal and empowerment of the people against, especially against the alternative of capitalism in an exterminatory phase, I just don't see what who will we work with in the places you just mentioned. Are you going to tail your local bourgeois and feudalists seeking the assistance of a local great power, India, that was intimately tied up with the most? It's not just tied up with imperialism, but imperialism is in a stage where what they call neoliberalism, of where all the erosion of all gains of the working class over the 100 years have been sabotaged and subverted. Do you think that will lead to a progressive solution in Pakistan or Baluchistan? It won't. But meanwhile, if you're siding on that side instead of, if you're a part of the working class or communists, you would be working with fellow workers throughout Pakistan and South Asia, but you'd be working with other workers all around the world. And if you go to the called both the most conscious and most oppressed elements of the US working class, which is a key theatre for the world revolution, is the coming civil war or revolt or revolution, the Second American Revolution, which is going to be that most violent of things, mainly heat and very little light, and it's going to be a vast thing. But the most conscious and oppressed elements are saying that are calling for global solidarity, because they're saying even to save the planet, we must confront the US war machine and the class forces that prop it up. That the United States, like once Russia used to be called the prison of nations, is the United States state is the global state that maintains the capitalist system elsewhere. If you had, what would be better for the future of humanity? The Chinese model, whatever you think of it, eclipsing the US model, or the US model succeeding in crushing or subjugating the Chinese model, which I'll call the ongoing evolution of a socialist post-revolutionary model.
Well,
I think there's no doubt, in fact.
It's no doubt, maybe, because at the same time we can say that 2008 crisis the capitalist crisis was saved by China in a way, because it's put up 45% of whole world construction material to construct houses in this backyard, which some of them are still lying vacant actually, and created a bubble in his own country, and saved actually Australia even from going into crisis. Then it saved Ecuador and Chile, and from where it could buy those iron ores and things like that for construction material. Fact is that this is fine, but then it supported all that, and then Chinese hold $1.1 trillion bonds, American bonds as well. They are reciprocating each other in certain ways, and this is so globally interconnected economy that if one goes, other stutters at the same time. So and it can stumble, really fall down really. So I think they are interconnected and they are supporting at the same time to each other. This is also a reality that they are enemies. They are. One side claims to be a socialist, and the other side is imperialist. There's no doubt whether it claims or not. That's their freedom is total freedom of market and nothing more than that. And America, we can see the wealth transferring from west to the east, and there's no doubt about that. And fact is that Chinese are are in commanding position now. They are gradually coming up, it's a second largest economy anyway, but now it's going to become the first largest economy with the passage of time, and that is why we are watching Trump phenomena in America, making America great again, and those all slogans which are coming over up, because America is no more great. America is no more only power in the world. So that's true that China is coming up, but we are watching China from a certain perspective, which we think this is a Marxist, socialist Marxist perspective actually, and we have to see that accumulation of wealth, keeping wage relations, keeping them intact, then producing commodity production, exchange values, everything is still there.
Yes.
So which phase we can call it? China is in which phase right now?
Well, what do the Chinese say they're in?
Well, Chinese have not much to say. They say that we are heading towards communism. I mean, so did Brezhnev said actually in 1980s when they were about to collapse. So is it? I don't know really, because I'm not a Chinese and I'm not working there. So I would like you to let me know about it really.
Well, the Chinese see themselves as a part of the historical world socialist revolution and the transformation of capitalism into communism. But they are warning that this is already at least more than a century long. If you take the 19th century before the Russian Revolution up to now, it's a centuries long process. What's more is, ironically enough, you'll have to argue you cannot have socialism you can have socialism in one country, but you certainly can't have communism in one country. So what they're arguing, they're just now entering getting to the early phases of a mature socialist economy. But socialism intrinsically implies that class systems still exist and class relations still exist. That's why it's called socialist, not communist. But you've got to look at the external as well as the internal factor. On one hand, we can look at the fact that the Chinese model is already eclipsing the Chinese model, the American model of imperialist capitalism at a most stagnant stage, is that their idea of socialism with Chinese characteristics sits in as that's their way of doing their revolution. They're not using a preset model. They have a socialist basis or communist perspective, and they are moving slowly through, or relatively rapidly when you look at the actual rate of development there in relation to other nations. But it is moving towards the ultimate transformation of a class society into a classless society, not meaning in China, but meaning as a communist world. Ultimately, the rate at which China evolves will ultimately depend on, for example, a major revolutionary thrust in Europe, or above all in the United States, because that is the core of imperialism at this moment of history. And where we have to see is what we are doing. Are we helping the forces of revolution and labour maximize our unity and our strength in relation to the forces of global capital, and it needs to be, in a sense, harmonised or synchronised internationally and at all levels. Certainly Americans, the working class socialists of America, would see that what China offers is so obviously a superior mode to what the United States offers. And why they call for solidarity is just as United States, its oligarchy, its war machine, has been destroying country after country since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Not that it wasn't doing it before, but even more blatantly since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's now got to the point basically where it's cannibalising itself, and that whole areas of the United States themselves are basically under occupation with a highly militarised police force and surveillance state, with the collapse of all infrastructure, with declines in living standards, increases in poverty. They see that whatever you call the Chinese model, the ability of that to both plan and allocate and bring people out of poverty. There are quite raising, and it's all aimed as here are our objectives via 5-year plans. It's way beyond the scope of what the United States and its oligarchy could dream of. The whole world, to the humiliation of the United States, saw how, without vaccines, how China was able to move quickly to solve the COVID virus, while the United States and those countries under its influence, other than a few, such as Australia, have let the stuff rage. It's showing itself to be a more proficient and equitable model of development for working class people, especially in the third world and United States. And the fact that the ideological war against China is so pervasive and full of so much misinformation, it means it's very important for us to work out our orientation. If I were a communist in Baluchistan, even though it may look harder, or I wish to have a Baluch autonomous state or region, is as far back as the Communist Manifesto, is these things will only be achieved through the course of a larger socialist revolution. Our natural allies of the working class, which is minuscule in Baluchistan because of its backwardness, though with industrialisation and modernisation it may grow further, is those communists need to be reaching out to their fellow workers in South Asia. I'd suggest through internationally, United States, Europe, but it's got to be the working class that they're reaching out to, and if necessary, talk to Chinese trade union federations and Chinese communists. But that would show their orientation was towards the progressing of the world socialist revolution. At the moment, working to destroy the Belt Road Initiative, block off Guadar, whatever, may not be originating or being funded by, though if it were, it wouldn't be the first time, of the encouragement by United States of separatist movements to further its imperialist aims. The fact that they seek the help from India, and India is quite willing to offer because it sees it's going to dismantle Pakistan and get back more of the greater India and Pakistan disappear.
I'm sorry, I don't think there is such a movement over there.
Of-
Separation. First of all, it's if it is there, it is a very weak movement led by lumpen elements. I don't consider
No,
it a
it's
movement.
led by their
just,
bourgeois feudal elements.
There are no feudalism. Even
And
they are more sardars, tribal heads actually.
Yeah,
and
call
part
it
of them
feudalism.
are actually always they stay in power, and they remain chief ministers and everything over
Yeah.
there, and part of them actually just go away in Switzerland and they start their movement. Look, if we talk about Balochistan, let me make it very specific and clear about Balochistan, that Balochistan is divided into two different nations. Nation should not be used. I don't like to use word nation.
Yeah.
I would like to call it people. So two type of people, in fact. But in bourgeoisie they say, well, there are Pathans on one side, NWFP is Pathans and Pashto from Afghanistan, and the other is, and they are Pakistani Pathans actually, and the other one is the Baloch. Now, out of 10 million, 5 million are actually Baloch. Almost 3.5 million are Pathans who are staunchly affiliated with Pakistan and Pakistani army. They have deep links with, almost they make 14% of Pakistan army right now even. So, and then there are so many Punjabis and other communities living over there. So, Brohis, the original people. So, though out of those 50 million, those 5 million, how many can actually go and fight? No one is pushed. But the missing persons who is the biggest problem of that area. And missing persons are those who talk about, who are from the left, usually, and they want basic human rights. They want their hospitals, they want universities, and most of their youngsters who are closely affiliated with our left, actually, and they are running a website, Marxist.org. From there, they are the ones who are in the forefront. Of course, bourgeoisie is also there, because bourgeois interests are quite dominant over there as well, because they also want the power share, and they are not going for separation, because they don't have any number really to fight over there, and they already fought in 70s and they lost. Miserably. So it wasn't, the state coercion was terrible, but state hasn't provided them anything. So fundamental problem is related to their needs, basic needs. If you provide them, they won't mind. They would, if you construct the hospitals, you construct basic needs, there'll be no movement at all. But coming to second point, that, Chinese will not intervene. Definitely, it's Pakistan's internal matter. They will not intervene.
That's their philosophy through and through.
All the way through.
Always has.
Yeah. So, but the fact is that somehow Pakistan army and their unit, even Chinese army unit, are also participating to control that area. They have their own interest.
Well, people are destroying the current.
They are destroying everything. The subversive element. Look, it's very simple. We will have to see from this perspective. The Sui is the area from where Pakistan generates its almost 80% of natural gas. And from the last 60 years, Sui hasn't got a single connection of the gas in their own area.
Yeah.
So their grievances are very natural. And if the pipeline will run from there, they will demand it. They demand their share, actually. And they will blast it. It's no China. It's nothing related with anti-China. This is their own demands. That since they produce it, they should have it. It's nothing about China really, or not even Americans, because Americans do not want to. They are not interested in that area. Actually,
yes,
so far they are not. Because once they will become interested, it will become a fighting place. They will create those Talibans. They will create those. You see, where were Talibans in Afghanistan? Nowhere. They came out from blue, and they were helped by Pakistan and Americans to fight against USSR, and they became ultimately a force. So there is deprivation. We will have to see behind all these things that nothing happens from the blue. Things actually, there are ground realities. There are failures on the part of states. They do not provide the basic necessities to their people, and then those people actually fight their own war in an inverted consciousness. So even Taliban are fighting against their ruling class because they think that their puritanic Islam probably will bring them freedom to reach their own economic ends. Yeah. So there's always economics in the end. As a Marxist, I always think that economics plays the only role behind everything. And it's the superstructure, or whatever we call it, for instance, needs an economic base. So religion is a part of superstructure, and it comes from an economic base.
Yeah.
So I think
it also provides an ideology
to
mobilise the masses, in whose interest we have to wonder.
because ideology itself is inverted consciousness of the people. It comes through. This is how people actually see the reality, or they translate that reality. So coming back to China, we'll say that. Coming back to like China, that. What do you think? Why China? This is a separate question actually, and this is perhaps for my own knowledge. Why China supported the Sifuan Jihad? Because
that's a nice way of putting it. You've got to be careful how you load these questions. But obviously what you're doing here is one specific instance of the schism that occurred between the Soviet Union and the new People's Republic of China through the 50s, and it had an effect with socialist and progressive movements all around the world, of course. It's maybe not as big as the split that occurred in the 30s that resulted in a split of the Third International into a Third and Fourth International. But still, it was a considerable split. I think it is a bit ironic with what point of view you're trying to say, that the Chinese party regarded its Russian comrades as a bunch of socialist imperialists, which is most probably a strong theoritization of the fact that the Russians there acted like a bunch of boors. So they saw that was a syndrome of the whole assumption of the Soviet party and its its operators, that they had the moral high ground and superiority of understanding, and basically they could tell the Chinese what to do. The irony is that these days, I haven't heard anyone say social imperialism, but we've had the talk of the way they've been insensitive to local conditions. And I think that there may be a little bit of hubris there. But of course, whether it was there, whether it was in Australia where the CPA split into the CPA-ML, that happened everywhere around the world. So yes, there was a big problem for the world movement as a whole, because it fell into warring factions. It allowed divide and rule. Obviously, Nixon's approach to China was the idea of we could pull the Chinese away from the Russians and split that communist international front. So that might have fed into that. So where the Chinese saw Soviet incursion into Afghanistan as stepping on their toes, because China's got a small border with Afghanistan. Ditto, so did Soviet Union through its border states have a border. So that's disputable, but yes, that was a level of poison relationships, without going to the contradictions that brought that about and what it led to in different theoretical insights. I mean, what you're talking about is not unique. The same thing happened with Ethiopia and Eritrea. You had that in Africa with different. So you started to get alternative and competing left movements claiming the mantle of the revolutionary vanguard all around the world, including in these key spots like this. It would not have helped. I mean, the end was the socialist and progressive forces in Afghanistan were eventually hung off lamp poles in Kabul. So that's where the end of that led to. And as time would have it, you're now seeing that the Chinese and the Russians are sort of getting to be the best of buddies, because they have to, because they've both been targeted simultaneously. In terms of US imperialism, it's only a matter of we want to take them both out. Is it better to do them both at once, or which one should we do first before the other? So that's what I make of China coming in on that. They were taking steps because they saw the Soviet Union itself as socialist imperialist at the time, much how some people might describe them close up at the moment.
And how do you see what's happening in Ladakh border with India? the Chinese one-to-one fight with them, and what is why it is what is being carried out? What is the strategy behind it? Because they are not fighting literally with arms.
They're wrestling.
They're wrestling with each other.
Showing off their various kung fu skills.
Exactly,
Is the Indian or the Chinese school of
boxers,
martial arts going to
sort
prevail?
of a boxers that rebellion sort of a thing, which is, I mean, they're showing each other that we can box.
Yeah.
But what is all about actually? How do you see that?
Look,
Because it started by Chinese.
you can say it started by Chinese because you're saying this round started by the Chinese, if you want. You've got a situation where there is a need to provoke China anyway, and Modi is a very good friend of that. So with a right-wing nationalist government in India, it's going to win brownie points asserting itself against China, but it's doing it in areas that have long-standing disputed claims of both in terms of national sovereignty and in borders between countries. That's the situation where this sort of thing will happen as tensions are generally keyed up.
But isn't it that it is going to help the reactionary forces? It's going to strengthen Chinese. It's going to strengthen them more. The people generally who oppose Modi, who want to the left wing and all the workers, and they're on the road and they're fighting for their rights. Don't you think that they once these sort of a nationalistic gestures start, this jingoism leads to a sort of a change in the thought process of the people, and they say, well, for now we are fighting against an enemy. Let's make friends with Kuomintangs. And once the Japanese will go away, and we will come back and we will fight with each other.
Yes, luckily the Chinese communists ended up not doing that. They had to fight the Kuomintang, which they promptly did, but mainly after 1949. Look, these sort of messes are going to happen everywhere, and it's a part of the general raising of a level of confrontation with what's called, I think, the most dangerous thing humanity's ever created, which is an empire at the height of its power with nothing but the prospect of decline before it, increasingly trying to get a confrontation before it gradually loses its strength to fight at all. It's encouraging, I mean, you can either look at what's going on as totally historical and localised. There's coming out of the partition and independence of India, and it's breaking up into smaller states, and it's an ongoing squabble. There's been a number of wars there over...
We might have to cut it short.
Over 70 years. But I think in this context, you have to look at any of these localised skirmishes, even down to what's going on in Baluchistan or... but anywhere else, if you look at the situation of the Kurds in the Middle East, is that these where the dominant but declining power is trying to pick a fight before it's too late, you will get this stuff going on everywhere. It means that if we are communists, have to be looking at understanding that local in terms of a global context to try. Both sides equally to blame. Which one's more to blame or less? What will this lead to?
Frankly, Modi was looking for these things. Actually,
yes,
he
of course
he wanted to strengthen his hold on India, and he wanted to. Yeah. He's looking for these things to happen.
Yeah, and also there is a very strong movement, labour. Oriented movement within India and more broadly.
But it's not going anywhere actually so far.
Well, I don't know. This is why I would be stressing the natural allies of any workers' movement or communist movement is going to be not the forces within the state they're looking at, though they must be taken on, but to be working more broadly with other workers' organisations as a part of a global movement.
Actually, that is the tragedy everywhere in the West, because there are so many movements going on at different places, but they don't align themselves. They're all leftist movements,
Yes.
like Yellow Vests. In Chilean movement and other places in France, every different places. Even in Morales' case, you see how strongly they came back. Now the job is done. They have sold everything to IMF, and now the present government has to face the music. But the fact is that these movements do not align themselves together. They don't join themselves as an international leftist socialist movement.
No, we have to see the need for that. We've got to look. And I, without going too far, just on Baluchistan as an example, but generally, if, let's say that the most progressive and conscious elements of the US working class are calling for global solidarity against the US war machine, which is not only predatory in relation to the rest of the world, but is increasingly oppressing and cannibalising US society itself. We have to look at it. We either say, no, we don't think that is the greatest threat facing the planet, or we have to work out, well, are our actions strengthening or weakening the role of the US working class in relation to its bourgeoisie? Are we looking at where, I say a simple thing, is it's nice to look at 2 ports that the Chinese are trying to run the Belt Road Initiative through, but there are 800 US military bases in 150 countries. And those 150 countries mean they all have governments that are the lackeys of the United States. Because if they were not lackeys of the United States, they would not be there. Because if they weren't, they would have been replaced by now. So if we take on the United States, for instance, our first thing we must look at is our own national situation and work out who US or global imperialism's agents are holding down our nation state at the same time as we're building the global alliances so that we can work under those nation states to bring it down.
One last thing I would like to discuss is about the latest phenomenon now. A few days ago, Zai said very clearly that if you want to have China as friend, we are friends, and if you want to have China as enemy, we are enemies. So the trade which Australian government has is actually got a sweet jolt from Americans, from Chinese actually, and their wine has been taxed 120 times, and then over and above their coal. They have stopped their ships. Bringing coal into Chinese port, and they are establishing their own ties with Indonesia now, extending them to buy coal from them. So that's what do you think, that are we going to see a different China now, or who previously Chinese were not that hard. They used to accept these with smiling faces, like not a growling fox, a growling wolf, as Malcolm X said, but as a smiling fox. But now, is it a growling wolf and as well, which is coming up?
Given those 2 choices, what I would argue is, one, a kick in the head of the Australian bourgeoisie by the People's Republics of China is thoroughly deserved. We should take that as an opportunity to expose their lackey role for US imperialism, and they have not had to do what they have done other than their total subservient lackey relation to the United States hegemony. They themselves are not just the political tying in, but the neoliberal policies that go with being a lackey of the United States. You must have the country run along those lines, because that favours the US/Anglo-European corporate structure.
But do you think they would change? The bourgeoisie of Australia, would they change?
I'm saying it's an opportunity for us, rather than rush like lambs behind the Australian bourgeoisie and say, isn't it terrible what the Chinese are doing to us? We should say to the bourgeoisie, that was a well-deserved whack, given you're siding with, go that thing is you're about to spend $300 billion on weapons from the United States for protection and $300 billion to prop up the fossil fuel economy, which is historically just about defines what the US global hegemony is capitalism. That's reaching right. Monopoly state capitalism in the fossil fuel era, and it has so many stranded assets, it's quite willing to suffocate the planet so they don't strand all their assets. The Chinese are not having that problem.
Okay. Yeah, this is like what Shakespeare says: "If you wrong us, shall we not revenge?" So I think the time to taking revenge has come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saulat. And like I say, like a bunch of old recycled hippies, I'm sure we'll see each other around again.
Definitely. Take care.